could never have imagined the depths to which she would sink. When you marry someone, you trust them with your life, your future. You think that the two of you are untouchable. That's what I thought, too. But just before everything fell apart, I found myself staring at the numbers that didn't make sense. I never imagined this would be my story. Never thought I'd be standing here, telling you all of this. My name is Ethan, and for a long time I thought I had it all figured out. I was a man of principle, a man who believed in loyalty, hard work, and doing right by the people I loved. I had a steady job as an engineer, a beautiful house in Denver, and a family I thought was perfect. My wife, Claire, was the woman I had built my entire life around. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. I need you to know that this is not just my story. It's a story of betrayal, but also of justice, and I'm going to make sure she gets what's coming to her. I won't let her destroy me. We met when we were both in our 20s, bright-eyed college students just starting to figure out what life was all about. Claire was the calm to my storm. She was gentle, thoughtful, and endlessly kind. Her smile could light up a room, and her laugh, well, it had a way of making everything feel like it was going to be okay. And I fell for her hard. We got married right after graduation, thinking we'd have a lifetime together. The kind of love you read about in books, the kind where nothing could break you apart. But life, as I would soon learn, doesn't work like that. At first, everything was perfect. Claire stayed home and kept our house in order, and I worked long hours at the engineering firm, building a future for us. We didn't have everything, but we had each other, and that was enough for me. But somewhere along the way, things started changing. Slowly, at first, like a crack in the foundation of a house, small, almost unnoticeable. Claire's once predictable routine became erratic. She'd leave for hours at a time, and when I asked, she'd give me half-baked excuses. Just running errands, she'd say. Or, I needed some time to myself. And I, always the trusting husband, believed her. I didn't question it. I didn't want to. But there were signs. I just ignored them, told myself it was nothing. I should have known better. I should have seen the warning signs, but I didn't. And by the time I did, it was too late. The first real crack came when I found the bank statement. It was a regular Tuesday evening, just like any other. I was at the kitchen table sorting through bills. It was then that I noticed the charge. It was a large sum, $5,000 to a hotel I didn't recognize. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe it was a duplicate charge or something I had missed. But then I checked the date, and my stomach sank. It was just a few days ago. I had been at home. Claire had been at home. We hadn't gone anywhere. I looked at the transaction again, trying to make sense of it. $5,000 wasn't a small amount of money, and it certainly wasn't something we could afford on a whim. I swallowed the lump in my throat and dialed Claire. She picked up on the third ring. "Hey, what's up?" she said, her voice too casual, too rehearsed. "Claire, what's this charge on the bank statement? A hotel for $5,000? I asked, my voice steady but my heart racing. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Too long. That's nothing," she said finally. "I had to book a room for a work event, remember? I told you about it, but I didn't remember. Not at all. In fact, I couldn't recall her mentioning anything about a work event, let alone booking a hotel." The doubt crept in. It was the first seed of suspicion. And as I stood there, looking at that bank statement, I realized I couldn't just let it go. When Claire came home that night, she acted normal. Too normal. I tried to brush it off, tried to convince myself it was nothing. But something in the pit of my stomach told me it wasn't. She knew I was uneasy. I could see it in her eyes, the way she avoided my gaze. But she wasn't going to tell me the truth. Not then. And I didn't press it. Not yet. I wasn't ready to confront what I was starting to fear. The next few days were a blur of quiet tension. I kept asking myself if I was overreacting, if I was just imagining things. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I couldn't let it go. I didn't trust her anymore. Not fully, and that's when I started looking at the texts on her phone, checking the credit card statements, going through her things. It felt wrong, like I was betraying my own sense of trust, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to know. I had to find the truth. Because once that seed of doubt is planted, there's no turning back. What I found next? Well, that's when everything changed. But for now, I'll just say this. It wasn't what I expected, and it was worse than I could have imagined. I'll tell you something. When you first realize you've been lied to, it's like the ground disappears beneath your feet. You feel like you're falling, but you don't know where you're going to land. That's where I was, hanging in midair, stuck between the life I thought I had and the crushing weight of betrayal. The worst part was, I couldn't just sit there and take it. I couldn't pretend anymore. I knew I had to do something, but it wasn't going to be easy. Claire had played this game far too well. She was always one step ahead, her lies wrapped in layers of deceit, her actions hidden behind a veil of normalcy. She had made me doubt myself, made me think I was crazy for even questioning her. But now I had to trust my instincts. I had to be smarter than her. I started planning, quietly, methodically. The first thing I did was call in some backup. I wasn't going to expose her without knowing everything I could. That's when I reached out to Mark, an old friend who had become a private investigator. I knew he'd be discreet. He owed me a favor, and now was the time to collect. "Mark, I need your help," I said when he picked up the phone. "I need to know everything about my wife, her finances, her contacts, everything." There was a pause on the other end, but I could hear the gears turning in his head. "You sure about this, Ethan?" he asked. "This isn't just a matter of fixing things. It's going to get ugly." "I know," I said, my voice low. "But I need the truth. I'm not walking away until I get it." Mark agreed, and just like that, I was in motion. The next few days were filled with a quiet, almost unbearable tension. I couldn't focus on anything else. Every time I saw Claire, I had to force myself to act normal. I couldn't let her suspect that I was onto her. It was a game of cat and mouse now, and I wasn't going to be the one caught in the trap. In the meantime, I kept digging. I started checking her phone, looking for anything that would give me the evidence I needed. I found more than I expected. Texts, emails, even some voicemail messages that she must have thought I wouldn't find. One email in particular stopped me cold. It was from Steve, the man I now knew was her lover. It was clear from the tone of the message that they were planning something. They talked about a future together, about how things would work once I was out of the picture. It was all there in black and white. She had been lying to me, to our entire family, for months. But I needed more. I needed something concrete, something that would put all the pieces together and prove beyond a doubt what she was doing. That's when I remembered the financial records. Claire had always handled the finances, but I had access to our shared accounts. I logged into the bank account, my hands shaking as I scanned the recent transactions. And there it was, a large withdrawal, $5,000 to a hotel just a few days ago. The same hotel from the receipt I had found earlier. I couldn't believe it. She had spent $5,000 on a hotel stay with him. But I still needed more proof. I needed a confession, something that would tie her to everything I was starting to uncover. I started leaving small notes around the house, little clues I hoped she would see. I knew she'd eventually find them. And when she did, I wanted her to know I was watching, that I wasn't going to let her lie to me anymore. But the real breakthrough came when Mark called me a few days later. He had managed to dig up some old phone records, and it was there, hidden in plain sight. Claire had been calling Steve at odd hours of the night, sometimes multiple times a day. The calls weren't just casual, they were urgent, secretive. And on top of that, there was a text thread from a number I didn't recognize, one that seemed to belong to someone with ties to a criminal organization. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about an affair. It was bigger than that. She was hiding something more, something that involved money, power, and maybe even danger. I knew I had to act fast. It was no longer just about exposing her infidelity. It was about protecting myself, protecting my kids, and making sure that she couldn't destroy everything I had worked for. I started making preparations, getting everything in place. I contacted a lawyer, someone I trusted to help me navigate this nightmare. I knew I had to be careful. I couldn't let her suspect anything. If I was going to expose her, I had to be ready, to make sure everything was lined up before I took that final step. It was all coming together now. The pieces were in place, but I still didn't know exactly when I was going to make my move. I just knew that the truth had to come out, no matter the cost. And when it did, Claire would have nowhere to hide. The plan was finally coming together. I had the evidence, the allies, and the motivation. But now came the hard part, waiting for the right moment to strike. It felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, just waiting for the right wind to push me over. I knew I had to be patient. I knew I had to be methodical. One wrong move, one slip-up, and everything would fall apart. Claire, of course, had no idea what I was planning. She still thought she was in control, still thought I was clueless. Every day, I played my part, acting normal, pretending that I still trusted her, pretending that everything was fine. It was harder than I expected. Every time she looked at me with those eyes that once held so much love, so much trust, I felt sick to my stomach. But I couldn't let her see my emotions. I had to keep my mask on. It was a Wednesday when I finally reached out to my lawyer, Anna. She was sharp, no nonsense, and had seen her fair share of dirty divorces. I knew she'd be the perfect person to help me navigate the legal side of things. She had advised me to gather as much evidence as possible, which I had done. But now, I needed her help to start moving the pieces into place. We met in her office, a sleek building in downtown Denver, the glass walls reflecting the city's bustle. As I sat across from her, I explained everything: the affair, the drugs, the manipulation. I handed her the receipts, the text messages, the bank statements. She skimmed through them, her face unreadable. "This is going to be a fight," she said, her voice calm. "But if you're prepared for it, we can take her down." I nodded. "I'm ready. I just want to make sure she never gets away with this." Anna paused, her fingers tapping on the edge of the table. "There's something else you need to think about. This isn't just about you anymore. This is about your children, your legacy. If she's been hiding money, drugs, or anything illegal, it could affect them too. That hit me harder than anything else. My kids, my daughter, Lily, and my son, Jack. They were the ones who were going to suffer the most from all of this. And I couldn't let that happen. Not on my watch. By the end of the meeting, we had a plan. Anna would file for legal separation, but we wouldn't go public just yet. We had to be careful, make sure everything was airtight before I confronted Claire. I couldn't risk losing the upper hand. The stakes were too high. That night, after the meeting, I went back to the house, my mind racing. Claire was already home, pretending everything was normal. She was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping a glass of wine, her back turned to me as I walked in. She didn't look up, didn't even acknowledge me at first. I took a deep breath and walked over to the counter, pretending to get something to eat. But my mind wasn't on the food. I was thinking about the next steps. I had the evidence. I had the lawyer. I had everything I needed. I just had to keep playing the game. "You okay?" Claire asked, her voice soft but cautious. She knew something was off. I could feel it. "Yeah, just tired," I replied, trying to sound casual. She didn't press the issue, and for a few moments, the only sound in the room was the soft clink of her wine glass against the table. I couldn't stop thinking about how easy it was for her to pretend, how easy it was for her to look me in the eyes, knowing she was lying, knowing she had been destroying everything I had worked for. And the worst part, I still loved her. I didn't know if I ever would stop loving her. But love wasn't going to save me now. Justice was. The next few days passed in a blur. I kept up the act, kept gathering evidence, kept planning. Mark had dug deeper into her finances, uncovering more secret accounts, more hidden transactions. He even found out about the shady business dealings Claire had been involved in with Steve. The more I uncovered, the angrier I became. I knew I couldn't keep this quiet forever. I had to confront her soon, had to make her face the consequences of her actions. But I wasn't ready yet, not until I had everything lined up. One night, as I sat in the living room, going through the records Mark had sent me, I realized something. I had been so focused on getting revenge that I hadn't thought about how I would feel afterward. What would I do once this was all over? Once I had exposed her, once she was gone? Would I feel victorious? Or would I just feel empty? I didn't know the answer yet, but I did know one thing. I wasn't going to let her destroy me. She had tried to break me with lies, with manipulation, with drugs, but I wasn't going to let her win. Every day felt like a countdown. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how deeply Claire had buried her betrayal. The texts, the phone records, the hotel receipts, all of it painted a picture that no amount of denial could cover up. And yet, she still acted like nothing was wrong, like everything was just as it had always been. The silence between us grew heavier by the day, and I could feel the weight of it in every room of the house. I kept up the charade. Every morning, I kissed her goodbye as she left for her errands, each time wondering if this would be the day she would slip up, the day she would finally give me the confession I needed. But Claire had become more careful. She was careful about when she left, when she returned, and what she said. It was as though she could sense the change in the air. The tension that hung between us was suffocating. I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that I was being watched. Every time I stepped into the kitchen, I felt her eyes on me. Every time I looked up from my phone, I saw her glancing away too quickly, as though trying to hide something. But I couldn't let myself become paranoid. I had a plan, and I needed to stay focused. Mark had been my lifeline throughout all of this. Every time I thought I had everything figured out, he unearthed something else. More receipts, more records, more damning evidence. He was relentless. He'd found something new just a day ago, and when I saw it, I knew it was the final piece. Claire had opened a joint account with Steve under a false name. The transactions were all in the same pattern: hotel bookings, expensive meals, the kinds of things we'd never splurge on. And then, the final nail in the coffin, a wire transfer, one that had been labeled as a gift. But the amount was shocking, $30,000. I couldn't believe it. She'd been funneling money from our account to Steve's. That wasn't just an affair. That was financial fraud. I stared at the screen for a long time, letting the magnitude of what I was seeing sink in. She hadn't just been unfaithful. She had been planning her escape for months, and I had been too blind to see it. The rage that bubbled up inside me was different from what I'd felt before. This was betrayal on a level I hadn't anticipated. This was about power, control, and greed. This wasn't just a broken heart anymore. It was my future, my security, everything I had worked for, being stripped away in the dead of night. I sat back in my chair, my mind racing. I had to act. The evidence was irrefutable now. Claire had crossed the line. But before I could confront her, I needed to be sure that I could prove it to everyone. Friends, family, the law. I needed to gather every piece of evidence I could find and prepare for the public fallout. I wasn't just fighting for my marriage anymore. I was fighting for everything I had worked for. The house, the savings, the kids' future. This was a war, and Claire had made the first move. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet house around me. I could hear Claire in the other room, probably on the phone with Steve, making plans for their future. The thought made my stomach turn. I had to make her pay for what she was doing, for what she had done to me. I knew this wasn't just going to be some quiet confrontation. This was going to be public. Claire had made her world a lie, and now it was time for everyone to see the truth. But I had to wait for the right moment, the right time to expose everything. I couldn't risk tipping her off too soon. I had to make sure I had the final piece of the puzzle. the one thing that would destroy her completely. The following day, when she left for one of her appointments, I took a drive. I needed to clear my head, get out of the house for a bit. As I drove through the streets of Denver, I couldn't help but feel the weight of everything pressing down on me. But as I thought about the plan I had in place, the evidence I had gathered, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. It was going to be over soon. Claire was going to face the consequences of her actions, and I would get my life back. The idea of that was a strange comfort. But I couldn't get complacent. I had to stay focused. By the time I returned to the house, Claire had already come and gone. I walked into the empty living room, my mind running through the steps that lay ahead. I was close. I could feel it in my bones. But as I stood there, staring at the place that was once my home, I couldn't help but wonder what would happen to the person I used to be once this was all over. Who would I be when the dust finally settled? Would I be a man who had been broken, or one who had risen from the ashes? Only time would tell. The moment had come. I could feel the tension building inside me, thick and heavy, like a storm about to break. Everything I'd been working toward, the evidence, the planning, the strategy, had led me to this. But there was something in the air tonight, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I could sense it. Claire knew something was wrong, but she didn't know what. Not yet. I had spent days, weeks even, carefully positioning myself to expose her. And now the cards were on the table. I had my lawyer ready, the private investigator had done his job, and the evidence was irrefutable. But Claire had played me for so long, I couldn't help but feel like I was walking into a trap. I needed to make sure I controlled this. It was time for the final confrontation. That evening I decided to set the stage. Claire had been acting more distant than usual, more guarded, and I knew she had to be hiding something. I called her earlier that day, asking if she wanted to go out for dinner, just the two of us. It wasn't unusual for us to have a quiet evening together, but I could tell by the way she answered that something was off. "I thought you were working late," she said, almost too casually. "I finished up early," I replied, forcing a calmness into my voice I didn't feel. "Just wanted to spend some time with you." She hesitated, but then agreed. I told her to meet me at a little restaurant downtown. Quiet, unassuming, but with a reputation for great food. I needed a place where I could be in control, where she wouldn't be able to slip away. I wasn't about to let her talk her way out of this one. As I got ready, I went over everything once more in my head. The financial records, the texts, the hotel bills, the wire transfer. There was no escaping what she had done. There was no way she could explain it away. The dinner was set. The moment was almost here. When Claire arrived, she was dressed in one of her favorite outfits. Elegant, effortless, the kind of thing she wore to mask the chaos beneath. But her smile, the one that once made me feel safe, felt forced now. It was as if she was trying to convince both herself and me that everything was still fine. We sat down at the table, and I could see her scanning the room, looking around like she was waiting for someone. The calm facade she wore was starting to crack, and I couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. "So, how was your day?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, trying not to let my anger slip through. "Busy," she said quickly, stirring her wine glass. "A lot of work stuff." I nodded, pretending to listen, but inside I was watching every move she made. She was nervous. She couldn't hide it. She kept glancing at her phone, checking the time, and I knew she was waiting for something. Probably Steve. I had already found the messages they'd sent each other that morning, plans for later, something to cover up the fact that she'd be with me tonight. I had made sure to leave my phone at home. I didn't want any distractions. I needed her to focus on me, on what was about to come. I finally spoke. "Claire, we need to talk." Her eyes immediately shifted, and I saw that flash of panic I'd been waiting for. It was brief, but it was there. "What about?" she asked, her voice more defensive now, more guarded. I leaned in, my hands clenched on the table. About the hotel, about the money, about everything. She froze for a second, and for a brief moment, I thought she might confess. But then she took a deep breath, and the mask went back on. "You're overreacting," she said, her tone cool, dismissive. "You know how stressful everything has been. This is just your paranoia talking." I didn't flinch. "I'm not paranoid, Claire. I have the receipts. I have the bank statements. I know about the wire transfer. I know about Steve." The color drained from her face. She tried to recover, but the damage was done. I had her cornered now. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, her voice shaky. "You're making this up." "No, Claire, I'm not making it up," I said, pulling out the file I had prepared earlier. I placed it on the table between us. The receipts, the bank records, the texts, everything. I slid the papers toward her, watching as her hands trembled when she picked them up. She looked at the evidence, her face pale, her breath quickening. She couldn't deny it anymore, not after everything I had uncovered. I watched her face change, her anger boiling over. "How could you do this to me?" She spat, her voice rising. "I'm doing this for us. For our future." "For us?" I shot back, the anger finally breaking free. "You've been lying to me, Claire. You've been using me, playing me for a fool. This isn't about us. This is about you and your greed. You and Steve." Her eyes flickered with guilt, then defiance. She didn't know what to say anymore. "I didn't want it to be this way," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I was just trying to escape." "Escape?" I repeated. "Escape from what, Claire? From the life we built? From the family we have?" She looked away, unable to meet my gaze. The truth was out now, and she knew there was no way to cover it up. The lies had been exposed. I took a deep breath, trying to control the storm inside me. This was only the beginning. I wasn't done with her, not by a long shot. "I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth," I said, my voice cold, final. "I'm not letting you destroy everything I've worked for." As I left the restaurant that night, Claire was silent, staring at the papers in front of her. I knew it wasn't over. Not yet. But she had been exposed, and I was just getting started. The next few days felt like a blur of anger, disbelief, and exhaustion. Once the truth was out, I didn't care about the petty fights or the explanations Claire tried to offer. She tried to justify it, tried to tell me that her affair, her deception, was somehow all for a greater purpose, some noble cause I couldn't understand. But all I could hear was the sound of her lies crumbling, piece by piece, with every word she spoke. I stayed away from the house for the next few days, letting the silence hang between us. I needed space to think, to process. I couldn't stand the sight of her anymore, and I certainly couldn't stomach the thought of facing her without knowing how I was going to finish this. But it wasn't just Claire I had to deal with now. It was everything she had set in motion. The fallout was inevitable. I knew it would be messy, painful, and I didn't want my children caught in the middle. But I also knew I couldn't let Claire get away with it. Not after everything. She thought she could break me, but she had underestimated just how far I was willing to go. I contacted Anna, my lawyer, first thing that morning. I told her everything that had happened, that Claire had finally admitted to the affair. But it wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about everything Claire had been doing behind my back, using me, my trust, my resources, to fund her new life with Steve. The wire transfers, the secret accounts, the hidden debts. I needed to make sure that she couldn't just walk away from all of it. "Ethan, it's time to act," Anna said when I called her. "We can file for divorce, and we'll make sure we get the assets frozen. Claire is not walking away from this unscathed. We'll fight for everything, including full custody of the kids." She was right. I couldn't let Claire take my children and leave me with nothing. I had to protect them, protect what was left of our lives. So I gave her the go-ahead. The divorce proceedings would start, but I needed to make sure I had every angle covered. Anna was meticulous. She filed papers, requested statements, and made sure we had a clear path forward. But that wasn't enough. Claire had to face the full consequences of her actions. In the following days, Claire started to unravel. The denial was gone, replaced by a desperate attempt to save face. She tried everything, playing the victim, pretending to be sorry, even begging me to forgive her. But it was too late. The damage had been done. I couldn't unsee what I had discovered. I watched her as she tried to keep up appearances. It was pathetic. She couldn't even look me in the eye anymore. It was clear she was struggling, knowing the inevitable was coming, but she refused to acknowledge the truth of it all. She didn't deserve forgiveness. She didn't deserve any of the comfort or security I had given her. It was time for the world to know exactly who she was. The first public reveal came when I posted the evidence on a shared online platform, something that would make sure everyone who needed to know would. I was done hiding. I wasn't going to let her drag me through the mud anymore. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. She needed to pay for what she had done, not just to me, but to our family, to our kids. The affair? That was one thing. But everything else? The deceit, the manipulation, the financial sabotage. She needed to answer for all of it. The next morning, the calls started coming in. Journalists, family members, and even mutual friends started reaching out. The message was out there. People were talking. Claire was losing control. I could feel it. She hadn't just hurt me. She had hurt everyone around her. Friends who thought she was perfect. Family members who had trusted her. Everyone was now left holding the broken pieces of a life she'd destroyed. By the time Claire called me again, her voice was shaky. "Ethan, please. Please stop. This isn't helping anyone." "You don't get to decide that anymore," I replied coldly. "You had your chance, Claire. You had every chance to come clean, to fix things. But you chose this. You chose him. Now, you're going to deal with the consequences." There was a long pause, but I didn't want to hear her excuses anymore. The truth was out, and nothing she said could change that. I was done listening. As I prepared for the next step, further legal proceedings, custody hearings, I couldn't help but feel a sense of finality. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about vengeance either. It was about something much deeper. It was about reclaiming my life. It was about standing up for the future I wanted, the one I had built with my own hands. Claire had tried to take that from me, but I wasn't going to let her. The next week, I filed for a restraining order against Steve, knowing that he had played just as big a role in this as Claire had. I couldn't let him get away with it either. He wasn't just some guy she was having an affair with. He was complicit in everything that had happened, from the financial manipulation to the emotional damage he had caused. He needed to feel the weight of his choices, too. I had taken control. I was fighting back. But, despite everything, despite the anger and the hurt, I couldn't help but wonder, would any of this make me whole again? Would exposing Claire, tearing down the walls she had built, make me feel better? Or was this just the beginning of a much longer road, one that would take years to walk before I could finally look in the mirror and see someone who had been healed, someone who had moved on? All I knew was that I couldn't stop. Not now. Not when I had come so far. The court date loomed closer, and I felt the weight of it pressing down on me every day. The final step was near, but every part of me wanted to rush through it. I wanted Claire to feel the consequences of what she had done. Wanted to make sure she didn't just walk away from all of this with nothing more than a slap on the wrist. But even as the legal system moved forward, a part of me kept wondering, what would it feel like when it was over? I wasn't naive enough to think that winning this battle would erase the pain, but I had to make sure the truth came out, and that Claire couldn't hide behind her lies any longer. There was no going back now. No way for her to spin this into something she could manipulate. I wasn't just exposing her to the people around us. I was exposing her to herself. The reality of what she had done was something she could no longer deny. The day of the hearing came, and I walked into the courtroom with a sense of calm that surprised me. The last few months had been a whirlwind of emotions, but now, as I stood there, it felt like everything was finally coming to a head. Claire sat across from me, her eyes bloodshot and tired, her usual composure replaced by the broken facade she had tried so hard to maintain. She knew what was coming, but I could see the desperation in her eyes. She didn't want this. She didn't want to lose it all, but she had already done that. Anna, my lawyer, stood beside me, her presence steady and confident. She had been instrumental in making sure that everything was airtight, that we had every legal angle covered. The judge called the court to order, and everything fell into place. My heart was pounding, but my mind was sharp. I was ready for this. The first part of the hearing was a blur, as Anna presented our case. The evidence was undeniable. The receipts, the financial records, the testimonies from the private investigator, and the text messages. We laid everything out, and Claire couldn't hide anymore. The evidence was clear. She had betrayed me in every possible way, emotionally, financially, and in the most intimate ways imaginable. But when Claire's lawyer stood up to make their case, it was almost laughable. He tried to paint her as the victim, someone who had been pushed to the edge, someone who had simply made a mistake. His words were hollow, empty, because there was no real defense for what she had done. The affair, the deception, the manipulation, none of it could be justified. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. She had chosen this path, and now she was going to have to face the consequences. When the judge finally spoke, I felt a mix of relief and vindication. She ruled in my favor. Full custody of the kids and the financial assets were frozen pending further investigation into the hidden accounts and illegal transactions Claire had been involved in. The court also ordered Claire to pay restitution for the money she had misappropriated, and any further dealings with Steve would be investigated for possible criminal involvement. It was a victory, but there was no real joy in it. As much as I had fought for justice, I couldn't ignore the emptiness inside me. This wasn't the way I had wanted things to end. This wasn't the family I had worked so hard to build. But it was over, at least in the legal sense. Claire had been exposed for the fraud she was, and now there was no more room for her lies. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted, and I could finally breathe again. I didn't have to carry her secret anymore, but the battle had taken its toll. It had changed me. It had hardened something inside me that I wasn't sure would ever soften again. I had stood up for myself, for my children, and for the future I wanted to build. And now, there was nothing left but to move forward. The next step would be about rebuilding, about figuring out what kind of person I wanted to be after all of this. Could I ever trust again? Could I let go of the bitterness, the anger that had been consuming me for months? I didn't have those answers yet, but I knew one thing. I would take back control of my life. Claire had tried to break me, but she had only made me stronger. And as for her, the justice had been served, and now she would have to live with the consequences of her actions. I never expected to feel this empty after everything. The court ruling, the custody arrangement, the financial settlements, all of it was exactly what I had fought for. And yet here I was, standing in the middle of the life I'd fought to save, only to realize how much of it had already been shattered beyond repair. I didn't feel victorious. There was no satisfaction in seeing Claire face the consequences of her betrayal. No joy in knowing that she was exposed for what she truly was. All I felt was a profound weariness, like I had carried a heavy weight for so long that, once it was gone, I was left with nothing but the ache of a body that had forgotten how to move without it. As I stood there in the empty house, our house, the one we had built together, something inside me clicked. It was over. And yet the question lingered. What now? The pieces of my life were scattered, but the pieces of me, where were they? Who was I now? The man I was before, the one who trusted and loved with everything he had, was no longer there. The Ethan who had stood tall, believing in his family, in love, in loyalty, he was gone. My thoughts often turned to the kids. Lily and Jack were still young. They didn't understand the full scope of what had happened, but I could see it in their eyes. The confusion, the hurt. They missed their mother, but they also missed the version of me that I used to be. The father who wasn't consumed with anger, who didn't have to fight for every inch of his peace. How could I ever explain to them why things had changed? How could I tell them that sometimes the people you love most can break you in ways you never thought possible? The truth was, I didn't have answers for them. Not yet, but I did know one thing. I wasn't going to let Claire's choices dictate who I became. I wasn't going to let her define the rest of my life. I needed to rebuild. It wasn't just about the house or the finances or even the custody arrangement. It was about me, about finding myself again. I had spent so much time focusing on Claire's betrayal, on the lies and the manipulation, that I had neglected the one thing that mattered most: my own future. I had to reclaim it. The days that followed were filled with small steps forward. It wasn't easy, not by any means. Some nights, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together the man I used to be and the man I needed to become. I went through old photos of us, me and Claire, our wedding day, our first vacation, the kids as babies, and felt that sting of lost possibilities. But I also began to feel something else, a quiet strength. I wasn't going to let anger be the thing that guided me. I wasn't going to let the bitterness I felt toward Claire consume me. It would take time, sure, but I would learn to let go. I wasn't going to live in the shadow of what she had done. No, I would rise from this, stronger, more focused, and more determined than ever to create a life for myself and for my children that was based on something real: honesty, trust, and love. But this time, it would be on my terms. And as for Claire, she was a part of my past now, a chapter I had to close, no matter how hard it was to turn the page. She had tried to break me, but in the end, she had only forced me to become someone new, someone I could respect. And that was something she would never take from me. So I took a deep breath and looked ahead. There was no going back, no undoing what had happened. But there was always a way forward. And for the first time in months, I felt the smallest flicker of hope. The road ahead was mine to walk. It's strange, the way life continues moving forward, even when you feel like everything around you has come to a complete stop. I thought that once the court case was over, once the truth had been exposed, the weight would lift from my shoulders. But instead, I found myself standing at a crossroads, unsure of where to go next. The divorce was finalized, the house was sold, and Claire had moved out, taking only a fraction of what we had built together. But the part that weighed heaviest on me wasn't the loss of material things. It was the loss of the future I had imagined for us, the future I thought we would share as a family, the future I had promised to my children. The kids adjusted better than I expected. Lily, always the curious one, asked questions that I didn't know how to answer. Jack, my quiet son, seemed to retreat into his world of video games and books, not asking many questions but always watching. Their pain mirrored mine, and I felt the weight of it every day. But as I watched them start to heal, I couldn't help but wonder if I was healing too. I spent more time with them after the divorce, taking them out to parks, watching movies, and just trying to give them some semblance of normalcy. I wanted to be a good father, to be there for them, to show them that despite everything, life could still be good. But as I did all this, I started to realize something else. I was starting to forgive myself. The anger I had held onto for so long slowly started to fade. It wasn't that I had forgotten what Claire had done, or that I was pretending it didn't matter. No, it mattered. It mattered a hell of a lot. But as time passed, I started to understand that forgiveness wasn't about letting her off the hook. It was about releasing myself from the chains I had put around my heart. I had spent so much time focused on the betrayal, on the revenge, on making her pay for what she had done, that I had forgotten to look after myself. I had forgotten that I deserved peace, too. Claire, for her part, had disappeared from the picture. I hadn't heard from her since the divorce was finalized. I didn't know where she was living, and frankly, I didn't care. She was no longer a part of my life, and that was enough. I had come to terms with it. I had no need to keep digging into her life, no need to follow her downfall. But the one thing I did think about often was how everything had shaped me. I was no longer the same person I was when I first met Claire. I wasn't the idealistic young man who believed in love as something untouchable, something unbreakable. That version of me had been shattered. But in the process, I had built something stronger in its place. I had learned to trust again. Not in people necessarily, but in myself. The house, the memories, the life we once shared. It was all gone now, but I was still here, and I still had my children. They were my purpose now. They were my reason for moving forward, for becoming someone better. And in time, I would find my way. I didn't have all the answers yet. I didn't know exactly what the future held. But I knew one thing. I wasn't the man I used to be. I was someone new, someone wiser, someone who had learned that even in the worst of times, there was always room for growth. And as I sat there, watching Lily and Jack play in the backyard, I knew that I would be okay. Not because everything was perfect, not by a long shot, but because I had made it through, and I was stronger for it. The aftermath was still unfolding, but for the first time in a long while, I could breathe. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but it was mine to walk. And that was more than enough.